Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Andrew Kisslo, Senior VP of Global Partner Marketing at SAP. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You have an amazing background. We have a lot to talk about. But before we get started, it would be great if you would please take a minute or two and introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm Andrew Kisslo, as you mentioned. I am the Senior Vice President of Global Partner Marketing at SAP. At SAP, what that means is we've got about 23,000 partners. And so I always think that partner marketing is the easiest to explain and yet the hardest to do. My job simply is to make sure every partner has what they need to empower them to build their business with SAP. The reason why it's hard is you need as many partners to be as good or better than you are at talking about your products, which is ultimately a really difficult thing. But that's my job, and I love every minute of it.
So you have an amazing background. You have worked at Microsoft. You actually worked at SAP, then you went to Microsoft, then you came back to SAP again. And those are amazing brands. We're built on Microsoft Stack, bottoms up. We started actually an agency about 15 years ago, and we had SAP as a customer on the agency. We did partner marketing for you a long time ago.
Okay.
But since we moved over to software, we don't do that anymore. But I would love to have you kind of talk a little bit about the journey that you have had, because a lot has changed. This notion of partner and marketing, it used to be called channel marketing, and it changed to partner marketing. So can you tell us a little bit what it was like 20 years ago or 10 years ago and what it is now?
I think when I look back, as with anything in retrospect in technology, there's so much that has changed, but the patterns repeat themselves. And this is sort of the dichotomy of technology, which is long ago when I joined SAP as a startup. When I got out of business school, I joined a very small startup. I was the 100th employee. The board of directors was Andy Grove, the founder of Intel, and Hasso Plattner, the founder of SAP. Some people think of him as the Bill Gates of Germany. And that small startup was SAP owned and Intel backed. And our whole goal was, how do you take supply chain software and put a web front end on it in the dot-com boom? And at the time, that was a big idea of how do you have real-time inventory? And most of our customers were big brand names that also ran SAP. Adidas, Fila, a bunch of sort of really big products. And what was really fascinating about the time was we were one of the first companies to figure out, how do you have a business model to run software for other people and monetize it, not through licensing. And it was a full SaaS model that basically at the time was, we will run your infrastructure and we will drive all of your inventory and demand gen. We just want a % of top line revenue that goes through the system. It was this really fascinating business model of, how do you scale out, at the time, not multi-tenant cloud, but really thinking about the cloud in different ways, because we were at the precipice of this. And so I did that job for a while. I ended up moving into two-sided marketplaces, Commerce One, Ariba. SAP was doing something of really trying to figure out, how do you have large exchanges trading networks effectively? Because at the time, the technology was sort of at the frontier of that. Long story short, I ended up joining Microsoft because we had a joint product that we were working on together. And visionary at the time, now we take it for granted, but how do you take Outlook, the most common user application arguably in the world, and how do you have something as simple as, I'm logging in my calendar today, and it should go into a billable system on the back end? And so the two companies got together and had this vision then of, how do you take back end and front end and meet them together? So I joined Microsoft. I did about 9 different jobs there, everything from working on Office and Azure and every business in between. And had a lovely career. So long story short, I ended up coming back to SAP about 2 years ago. I've always been marketing and usually externally facing, and it's been a wild ride, to be honest. So.
That's amazing. Can you tell me a little bit about, through that journey, how did what we call partner ecosystem today, what was it like, 10 or 20 years ago, and what is it like now?
Yeah, I'll think about it again, sort of what the names sometimes haven't changed so much, especially as you go higher into customer segments. So SAP runs 87% of the world's GDP on a daily basis. So the biggest companies in the world that you don't even think about are flowing through SAP all the time. As a result, when you go high into Fortune 500 companies, is the players that operate in there pretty much are the same names. It's Accenture's of the world, it's Bain's, McKinsey's, right? They're the ones who get pulled in. New names have come over time, certainly the hyperscalers and their ability to run the infrastructure and some of the technology that comes back and forth. But the way that the channel operates has totally changed. where it used to be certainly built around the business model of the vendor would sell, the partner would install. And then it was also you owned the licensing, right? And so what that did from a channel perspective was it was pretty linear. It was you went through the supply chain of the channel, you arrived at an implementation, and you were kind of done. And then you called them back if you needed something touched. And what has changed so much is right now you have so many different partner opportunities where you have multiple partners playing in an account at every level of the stack. And so you have much more complex channels today than we ever have seen before. The lines are not clean. And that's why it's awesome. And it's also why it's a real challenge for a lot of companies is to figure out how do I partner with you in one area where we may compete in another. We really saw this in the Azure business when I was on that, which was this sort of cognitive dissonance of you have companies that in one regard are competing with your first party products. Yet at the same time, you want to embrace third party as first party because you're driving a marketplace or attach motions. And so a canonical example would be Snowflake. Snowflake, working with Azure is great because you can solve a customer need. But Microsoft also wants to sell you technology that competes outright with Snowflake. And you see this in every industry where in one conversation we're friends and the other one we're maybe competing. And if I can't go to market with you, then I'm going to pick someone else. And so the portfolio of partners that you need to deal with every day just gets infinitely complex because every customer has choice. And you almost have to assemble go-to-markets down into segments, industries, sizes that are very, very custom. Whereas in the past, certainly in our world, it used to be if you wanted to work with any company in the world in oil and gas, there was one company in the world you worked with, Accenture. That was it. No one else talked to oil and gas customers. And so those days of kind of you pick one and you go to market are over. And so I think just the sheer complexity of how many partners you need to be able to handle all at once is just now, it just scales infinitely because of all the technology.
So let's talk about three things that I want to double click you said. So we'll talk about a little bit of the evolution of this partner type and broad spectrum of it. And then we'll talk about, maybe changing or the same roles of SIs and GSIs, the big one in enterprise. And then one of the word that we haven't talked about, but it's kind of in there, what you just said, which is distribution.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll come to hyperscaler later on. So let's start with evolution of this so-called different partner types. And traditionally, when IT started, it was very, very tech driven. But now, as you're kind of alluding to, there are other business functions, right? There are agencies, there are other types of partners, finance companies, auditing companies that are going in. So can you tell us a little bit about even the last decade, evolution-wise, and where it's kind of now from enterprise and mid-market-wise, evolution of partner types?
Yeah, I think, for us, we still classify our partners into sort of four major buckets. We have partners that sell in. Those would be our sell partners, traditionally a VAR model in our world. Then we have our global SIs, which are not only sell, but they tend to do more servicing and installing and large implementations. So that's your second category. Our third category would be ISVs or software partners that build on your stack. And typically those partners in our world take an SAP solution and they fill in the blanks of something that we don't do. A tax app for retail in the Nordics, right? We may not have the time or place in our systems to do that, but an ISV comes in and plugs right in there and they, with us, create best of breed. And then your final one, which is sort of the catch-all, but there are categories within it, are your tech partners. I think of your tech partners as more enablers, and that might be NVIDIA for us, right? We think about NVIDIA in our AI partnership, but no one is going to buy NVIDIA directly through SAP. The fact that it's in the box, people are assured our AI is good. Same with Anthropic, same with all the AI models. And hyperscalers are very similar, where knowing that I can run your system because I have choice to run it somewhere on a hyperscaler is an enabling element for us. So those are the four types. What's interesting is that over time, we see partners playing in all four at once. You can have a partner, let's just pick Microsoft, for example, where Microsoft certainly has the ability to sell SAP. They build software that connects into it. Obviously, with our co-pilot work with them and ours, there's a co-selling model there through the software. They do, depending on the company, install and help. And then they're a hyperscaler. They can just basically say, well, I can put it on a platform. And so you see various partners popping up with, potentially they're very familiar, but they're wearing a different jacket on that day. And that's the lovely part, but it also is the challenging part, because when you want to map organizationally against very clean lines, sometimes it stresses the system because everyone plays everywhere in some level.
So let's talk a little bit about these two great companies, Microsoft and SAP, right? Are their customer base roughly the same? Are there overlaps? And then when it comes to the partners, do they overlap or are they very different? What is similar and different between these two ecosystems?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to when you think about where we play together and where we have giant overlaps. We'll call it an Venn diagram. It's certainly the one area where we don't overlap really are B2C, right? Microsoft has an incredible amount of revenue and products. Xbox would be the example of, we don't play in that world. But when you think about commercial entities, and you just think about a standard pyramid of at the bottom of the pyramid are really small businesses, mom and pop shops, all the way up to the top of the pyramid would be the biggest companies in the world. What is really interesting about our joint install bases is Microsoft, plays almost in every single company in the world, even if they say they don't. Because even when a company says, I don't really run Dynamics, I don't run Azure, maybe I don't even use Office, maybe I'm using Google Apps, and I have Okta and I don't even run Active Directory, I don't use Microsoft. The likelihood that they have Edge installed on a PC is high. They're a customer. And so it's really interesting is that the tech stack is so broad for Microsoft that every company in the world is using some Microsoft technology on a daily basis. It just depends on, is it the app? Is it the back end? Is it the browser? For SAP, because we're an applications company, it's pretty clean to say, are you using our application to run your financials or supply chain or not, right? Because our tech stack is very robust, but pretty limited to biz apps only. The fascinating thing about our business is, even though 87% of the world's GDP goes through SAP, which you would think of as the biggest companies in the world, we have 80,000 companies that run a product from us known as Business One. And Business One is a product that has been around for almost about 20 years, and it is built for SMBs. It runs financials and general ledger and basic supply chain. And we have a huge, lovely business where, when you think about all the companies we have, like 90% are small businesses. It just so happens the 10% are giant. And so we have a really interesting area. As a result, what you end up seeing is when you overlay our install base against Microsoft is, in one regard, we're absolute partners. Dynamics, while it scales high, may not be running ExxonMobil. They're running SAP. But as you start going down, you're starting to get into companies that may say, well, should I run Dynamics or should I run SAP? And when you go super, super down low, we're all fighting for, companies that are maybe 5 people. And are they going to run anything from HubSpot to Quicken to a spreadsheet to something off the shelf, Business Central from Dynamics or Business One from us? And so, again, I think very complementary overlaps in some areas, and then some other areas where when you're trying to compete and get a customer, we would outright say, I want the customer, not you, and you end up competing. So hopefully that helps.
So let's go back to, one of the statements you made is that, it's easy to explain what partner marketing is, but it's very hard to do.
Yeah.
Within the context of these two very large, complex ecosystem with some overlap and none on the other ends of it, can you tell me a little bit about what is partner marketing in the context of large, complex B2B ecosystem versus highly fragmented B2C, kind of the Microsoft, the SMB market? Can you kind of take those two examples and explain what in your mind partner marketing is?
Yeah, partner marketing for me is kind of falls into 3 ways you do it. You could argue a fourth, but there's 3 disciplines within partner marketing. There's partner, which is basically your communication channel to your ecosystem. Anyone who has an external company that helps you sell or reference your brand has something to their partners. The second one is through your partners, and that's where a partner is doing business on your behalf. In our world, we have a long tail of partners that in theory are creating their own demand, finding their own customers, and then selling them and owning them for life. And in a through partner motion, you try to put, in my words, picks and shovels in their hands of content, campaigns, all the things that they need to do to go get empowered to do business on your behalf. And then you have with. And with partner is how do we travel together to the proverbial customer to say, we are two companies that have come together and you can rely on us versus picking something else. So SAP plus Accenture, we've got a point of view on the market. And so we're going with them. And what is interesting on this with motion is you're starting to see a world where it used to be you plus another person. And per our other part of the conversation, now it's usually you plus two other people. SAP plus Accenture plus Azure, or SAP plus an ISV plus Bain McKinsey. And so we think of them as either triple plays or the power of three. And sometimes you get into even more than that, but that's when you're going with them. The benefits of that is you obviously have a more robust sale, and everyone's cost of sale actually goes down because you're sort of aggregating and pooling money and pooling the power of brands. And you can go farther faster sometimes when you've got a lot of people in the boat with you.
So let's go back to this notion of triple play and going. Jay McBain, one of the analysts in this space, talks about the 7 layers that companies are marketing. We spend a lot of time talking to leaders like you on the sell side where co-sell is happening. So if I go back and double click these co-marketing activities, you have these 3 large, very complex organizations that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
SAP, Azure, McKinsey, or Bain on the other side, or whatever the combination is. What does the partner marketing motion look like? I mean, how do you pull those teams together? How do you align strategy? How do you put content together? How do you measure performance? How do you track? How do you, say, oh, it's not working, we got to redo the whole thing again? Like, how does all these things happen?
Well, I think, I would go to the macro thing at a high level for a moment, which is it's easy in this world to end up doing a lot of activity and not understanding impact. And so it's really critical for people to understand at any discipline, and especially within marketing, which sometimes people would accuse of being more art than science. Marketing as a discipline is actually incredibly scientific. And so one of the things that we always try and think about is how do we have goals with our partners where ahead of time we agree, what are we trying to chase? Can we measure it? What does impact look like? Activity is not impact, that's just busyness. And then to make sure that we can instrument it. Success ultimately over time can come in a variety of different things. It certainly needs to come from, did you generate pipeline, right? Marketing's opportunity and burden sometimes in life is how do you bang enough pots and pans where customers are coming forward and saying, I want to talk to you. And so in our world, we do measure, did we create pipeline? And when you go to market with another company or they're doing it on your behalf, the way you measure that is actually very different. Right. So if I'm giving picks and shovels to a partner who I'm not involved in their demand gen, but they're using either my development funds or my content, hopefully I will see in my backend systems that they're generating opportunities and that they're tagging, hey, I was able to get this opportunity because I either used your money or I used your campaign and content. The one where we may be on the hook, where SAP is leading the demand, and you go to an SAP event or an SAP.com, it comes in our front door. We generated the lead itself. Ultimately, it either lands in the hands of our direct sellers, or sometimes we generate demand and we hand it to a partner. And that's a very left brain, right, where we spent the money, we brought the customer forward, and based on where it may sit, we say, hey, it makes sense for you to work with a partner right now, lift and shift, partner lead routing, all the types of things. We can actually measure both, but how you go fund them, resource them, what you think about are very, very different when it's partner-led versus vendor, or in our world, SAP-led. So we break the world down into what are partners doing with the things we give them, and is there ROI? And then what are we doing to generate demand either for ourselves, and how are we handing that right to a partner immediately or later? And later might be we continue to work the opportunity, but we pull a partner in and we sell together, and then we own the customer, but the partner helped us win the deal, and then the partner may exit. So it really comes down to which commercial model does the customer end up landing in, right? Where it's partner fulfilled or vendor fulfilled.
So when you look at from a buyer's journey perspective, right, over the last decade, and especially post-COVID, significant of the buying decisions are being made before a buyer even approaches a seller, right?
Yeah.
So they educate themselves online, and then throughout the life cycle, especially if it's a complex deal, there's a multi-stakeholder buying process. People are constantly trying to educate themselves because they interact with a vendor through maybe a 90-minute or 2 hours, whatever, Zoom call with multiple people coming in.
Yeah.
So when we think about the partner marketing, Is it more front loaded for you and your team, or is it more bite sized across the entire journey of the buyers? How do you stack these, these
Yeah.
triple play wise, these other entities? How do you make sure they, as $1 million deal is flowing through the pipe, you're competing with, whoever else, you're feeding, those teams coming together and communicating to that distributed buying unit in a structured way?
Yeah, I think you pick up on a very important thing, which I try to talk about a lot, which is our buyer is changing. And that's not just us, that's the industry, right? I think and it's changing in a couple of ways. The one you raised was, I'll call it people's digital savviness of how much they're researching and how much they're actually able to understand in the journey of when they're selecting or thinking about software, how quickly they're able to arrive to a short list or even to a decision without even talking to you. And this really stresses a lot of companies because if you don't have a journey nailed out through your customer way, either through typically your largest front door, your .com, or all the ways in which you're trying to be seen and heard, to really understand your messaging has to be incredibly clear, has to be differentiated, and you actually have to give customers more than you ever have been willing to give them before. An example, we know that companies who are researching our software and others, their likelihood actually to go into your community or even into your documentation and support to think about, will it do the things I need to do because I didn't get what I needed on the .com or this white paper, is really high. So what people are looking for is really a wider aperture to ingest. And so it really puts a stress on, do you have the right content strategy to deal with the different kinds of information people need? The second thing is buying committees are very, very different. They're larger, younger. And so when you think about that, we know that buying committees now on average have gone from, they used to be about 8 people, depending on the research analyst firm you listen to, they can go up to 15, sometimes 20. 20 people, let's just do the math, 20 people poking around on any way in which they can absorb your information. And if 20 people each are having 5 interactions with you, that's 100 different digital signals. And really parsing through all of that noise and figuring out who are they, what are they looking at, what is the most critical thing that they need, so that when they call sales, they typically are calling sales for affirmation, not sell me. No one wants to be sold. I don't want to be sold. You don't want to be sold. No one's looking to be sold anymore. People are looking for validation. And so you have, the journey has changed, the size of the committees have changed, and the youngness. I think that the age of folks now is we're beginning to see as millennials come fully on board. I think it's by 2030, when you look at the World Bank data, there's 1 billion people that are turning 18 or older in the next 5 years, 1 billion. And as they enter the workforce, you can start to look at, mature markets are having lower birth rates, emerging markets are having higher birth rates, they're skewing younger. And so when you think about it, who is the buying committee? What motivates them? And older tenured folks tend to rely more on relationships and data, whereas younger folks more rely on external influencers. And so it already immediately, when you have a buying committee, someone may say, hey, I've talked to someone who's using it, or I have a friend, they like it. That's very different than someone who might be very seasoned, who are like, no, I know my sales rep, they took me to play golf and I like them. Like a very much more personal selling versus, crowdsourcing type of thing.
So I want to kind of come within your organization now with the amazing level of complexity or opportunity, however you want to frame it. How do you design an organization, going back to your McKinsey sort of frame, like 7 S's, right? Like, how do you put the go-to-market strategy together? How do you put a shared value together? How do you put the structure together? How do you put the staffing and the skill sets and how do you design this from an SAP perspective, or how did you do it in Microsoft?
Yeah, I think, and to clarify, you mean just for partner marketing or just all up at the company? I can try.
I'm talking about partner marketing. Yeah, let's stay there for now.
So I think for designing how we do it, I think it is really complex. I think one of the things that we try to do is my team breaks down into roughly 2 different parts. I have a part of the team that manages our biggest partners. It's about 200 of all the partner types we've talked about. They have a one-to-one relationship with these companies, and we try to build custom plans, of joint go-to-markets with them. IBM, Accenture, fill in the blank. And the other half of my team really thinks about enabling any partner in the world. Sometimes we have their phone number and we'll talk to them. Sometimes we won't. But we need to be able to, again, give them all the tools, typically in a self-service model. And sometimes you see the partners traditionally we might call it your depth partners. Your depth partners might not only call you and do a planning session, they almost also might go where everyone else goes and pick up things from you because they can self-service. That second class, though, I think that's been the larger your ecosystems get, you really have to make a decision of, can I effectively service every single partner in my ecosystem? In most companies of our size, the answer is yes, but not equally. You have to meet your partner where you're at. You have to certainly staff with humans and personal contacts at your biggest partners. Your mid-pack partners might be cohort number 2, is you've given them development funds, you've given them assets, you talk to them once a quarter, and you really try to make them feel like the big boys and girls of the world, but you just can't deal with them every single day because, frankly, they're in the middle of the pack. And then your long tail, you really need to make things self-service. You're even training sometimes partners at that end of the continuum how to do basic things like, how do you create a value prop? How do you run a campaign? Because they may not have a marketing department. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last year and a half is really trying to assess our ecosystem from a partner marketing maturity index. We call it the PMMI. And basically what it does is it tries to look at the 23,000 partners that we have and say, are you high, medium, or low in your marketing maturity? And high would be someone that has a marketing department and a CMO, and they actually effectively generate their own demand. They probably don't need that much help from us. The ones that are in the middle might have a marketing department or sometimes an intern. They have a high desire, and they might have enough wherewithal to go figure it out. And those are the ones that if you can help them, you can break them out to make them feel like the big boys and girls, but they do need a little assistance. And then at the bottom, you have ones that are very low marketing maturity, and training them as to what is a value prop or how to run a digital campaign, or here's a playbook of what to put on your website. You need to do that. And so you almost have to meet every partner where they're at based on high, medium, or low maturity, which really then factors into organizational design. You need some people that, you're going to skew more human heavy when you have lots of people you need to talk to. And then you can have smaller teams that are dealing with the scale partners because everything they put in market can get seen 5 times, 100 times type of thing.
So I still have 3 big questions, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock. But I want to kind of build on what you just said. You said, you want to treat all partners, but may not be equally simply because of resources and complexity. In this age of AI, and your CEO and CTO are your leadership is actively talking about, this new world that we belong to now. Does marketing, does it get democratized because you are able to put maybe agents or other form of capabilities to this long tail out of these 23,000 partners that you have that were not possible before because the ROI were questionable and you didn't have visibility. So what are you thinking? What are you doing in that part?
Yeah, I think, AI, when we think about AI in marketing, like its impact to marketing will remain in a couple of buckets. One is, and everything I'll talk about is generative AI and not predictive. Predictive has been around for a very long time. When we think about, we were doing it at Microsoft and we do it here, of how do you use AI and ML models to do predictive analysis of who your best customer might be in your funnel? When you think about Gen AI, the number one example where you can lean on Gen AI is content production, right? Being able to go in and create a very specific asset for somebody. We're just at the frontier, but I really have a vision where a partner might come along and say, I love this campaign that you've created that I can use. It's for supply chain, for CFOs in an industry, but I need something a little bit more specific. And putting AI to task there is, how do you take something that humans may have generated, but get it down to the pixel? That would take a really long time, a lot of V teams, people working to get something so super custom. But AI becomes a very easy use case to create content production that is purpose built, like literally in a sales cycle. And so I think there's a lot of potential there. AI also becomes an area, we'll say, for concierge functions. If you're a partner and you just want to know what a best practice is, you could call a telephone line and hopefully you reach a human. But hopefully in the backend platforms, the ability to say, hey, what are the best programs I could run right now for upper, mid, lower funnel? What has an ROI above a certain number? And what should I do? AI should come in with everything that's been done, so long as you're able to see it and track it and say, this is what I recommend you go do. And so, really helping a partner go further with recommendation engines has a lot of potential. So, I'd say content generation for one, and then we'll say enablement and assistance for partners are two great examples.
So let's talk about sort of kind of, over the next 12 to 18 months, right? From an adoption and AI wise and enabling the partner as well as SAP portfolio wise, because you have an incredible portfolio. Can you share like two or three big trends that you are driving for the customer that you may be able to leverage to enable the partners, help them market better?
Yeah, it breaks down into a couple things. And you almost have to think about the customer lifecycle. There are things that we're trying to do to help partners understand how to you go generate more demand for yourself. A unique thing in our strategy is as we are now taking our products and now they're more relevant for sort of core mid market. To go down market is a really different business model for a lot of companies, right? Because when you're going to your install base, that business model is around how do I get share of wallet? How do I upsell and cross sell because you have something I need and I want to attach something else to it? The other one, which is as you go into new markets, is really around how do you get a dollar from a new customer for the very first time? And when you lean harder on the channel there, they really need to understand how do they go do that for you in the first time. So that's how do you upper funnel give people all the assets, all the training. The second thing would be when we think about once you have found a customer and you've moved them through the progression is a lot of focus on partner enablement. Really in our world, it comes down to certification. We have about 300,000 consultants in the world in just one view that say they know how to basically touch an SAP system. I always say it's my saying, not the company's, but you want as many people having current driver's licenses as possible. The roads are changing and the cars are very different. So you need every consultant to understand all the new technology, especially when you bring AI into it and solve a customer problem with very different ways of implementing or getting value out of it. And so that's really a partner enablement through training the consultants and implementation. The final one, which we all know in a cloud world, is in the world has moved from did I buy it to am I using it? And really helping partners understand that the day renewal begins is the day after a contract is signed. And when a customer is not implementing and not using, they're not getting value. And as easy as customers found you is as easy as they will leave you. There's a lot of choice. And so you really have to think about helping your partners think about adoption, consumption, retention, and avoiding churn. It's one thing to add people in the front end, but if you're losing them out the back end, that's a bad business model. And so it really pushes on the channel to think about how do I earn the customer every single day because the contract is effectively needing to be renewed through adoption.
So when I listen to you, the level of complexity that you have to deal with and the clarity that you have, the framework that you just described, were you always like this? Like, how did you get here?
Well, in one regard, I thank you for validating that my life is hard, which is good. I think the second thing is, I don't know. I think my brain just always goes to you can make it as infinitely complex or simple as you can. And so my brain always goes to how do I just distill it into bite-sized chunks? And I can get complicated later, but if I can't frame it, then it's not clear for me. So I'm always trying to just frame something into easily digestible things. Because once you've framed it, you can attack it. But if you're overwhelmed by it or you just see all the pixels in the picture, but you're not actually seeing the picture, really difficult to know what moves what. So I don't know if I've always been this way, but it's kind of how my brain works every day, which is helpful for some and maddening for others.
But I know you have an incredible progressive and rising background. And there is one element of it I find quite interesting because I played that role, chief of staff role,
Yeah.
for when I was at Honeywell for the growth officer. And I was very young. And what I realized, quickly into the role, how political the role was. And I had to be very, very careful, being objective, data driven, but not influence the decision or even ever think I was part of a decision process.
Hmm.
So you played that role. You have a chief of staff. How did that help or change your perspective of leadership?
In so many ways. I think chief of staff jobs are not for everybody. I think there is a saying, and you may laugh at this because you've been one, which is you have to be smart enough to do the job and dumb enough to take it. And chief of staff jobs are very different in every industry and what people want out of it. But the reason why I loved it, and it was one of the moments in my career that I look back and I'm like, before, after. I entered the role knowing how do I begin to learn from a leader how they think about short, medium, and long term planning, decisions that are now versus decisions that are impacting my long range plan 5 years from now. How do I build culture? How do I navigate ultimately complex matrixed organizations to get work done or influence others to do work on your behalf? And also, how do you get the most out of the resources you're given? And so I was blessed to work for a leader for about 4 years, and we just kept renewing every single year. And I really took it as a leadership course in so many levels, how to think strategically, how to work in organizations, how to build culture. So I loved it. I thought it was great. And for the chief of staff that I have now, if anything, I hope and aspire that she'll have the same experience I did. If anything, I worry that I'll fall short on that because I got so much out of it that they're just fundamentally really, really great roles. But you have to be built for it too, because you take a lot, right? You just have to make sure that the leader or organization you serve is in the brightest light always, which means you're out of scene, you're out of frame, and that's okay. You have to really think about, do we have what we need? Are we getting things unblocked? Are we seeing the potential? Are we hacking enough growth? And so, in some ways, chiefs of staff worry so other people don't have to.
So I have one last question. I
Yeah.
know you have to go, but looking back when you're starting at Pandesic or the first job
Yeah.
that you took in SAP, if you would give yourself one advice to become who you are today, carry out that path and the journey that you had, what would that be?
I think I would probably give myself the conflicting advice. One would be, it's okay, everything's going to work out. Like one of the things I'm a natural worrier. And so I push and I push and I push. And I think at some level, you step back and realize, hey, we're not saving babies here. Everything's going to be okay. And if you're smart and you have good opportunity, things will work out. At the same time, I think there were lots of opportunities in my career where I decided to stay small in that moment. And that's such a personal thing. The younger you are or where you sit in an org, sometimes you see clarity and you just assume people above you see it too, and they've decided not to act on it. And I think learning to find your voice of when to raise your hand in a room that's sometimes intimidating, I wish I learned that skill earlier, because I think every person, whatever job you're in, you were the best person at that time to fill that chair. And it comes with an obligation of, in a social contract at work, is, hey, this is working or not working, and I have an idea. It doesn't mean that everyone needs to agree, but you're almost obligated to put it forward. And that means you have to raise your hand. And so I think one is, maybe I raised my hand too much, or I pushed, or I worried. And the other one was like, there are very clear moments where I wish I had the bravery to speak up, because I turned it out kind of being right. And I was like, oh, and people were like, why didn't you say that in the room? And I'm like, I don't know. I was just kind of nervous, and so I think finding your voice is a really critical thing. That's a journey for everybody.
Well, with that amazing note, Andrew, thank you. Thank you for being here. I'd love to have you back. There's so many other questions I didn't get the chance to ask you.
Yeah.
But
Thanks for
it's been
having me.
amazing. Thank you.
Great conversation.